persecuting would be the one that would tell Naaman, hey, there's this great prophet in Israel, in Samaria. So he goes to his king, Naaman goes to his king, Ben-Hadad, and says, hey, can I go? He sends him a letter and a whole bunch of, like, 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, 10 changes of clothing, all the stuff in this letter that he sends him down to, sends it to the king in Israel, who is probably Jeroboam, somebody like that. We don't really know exactly which one. When the Bible doesn't mention the king and just says, oh, there's a king, it means that he's not salient to the story. It's kind of a diss. It means that he just wasn't really all that important or all that critical to what the story is. Kind of an irrelevant guy. He does what irrelevant kings do. He goes, oh my God, why is he sending this great general down to be cured? Am I God? Can I just cure people? I can't just cure somebody of leprosy. So he kind of has a panic. He sends for Elisha. Elisha says, what are you being so fearful for? Just bring the guy. Let him know that there's a prophet in Israel. And remember that a big part of Elisha's ministry was to the people of Israel because they had gone apostate. They were worshiping false gods. And they knew that Elisha knew that unless they repented, judgment was coming. So he would do this a lot. He said, let them know that the presence of God is still here in Israel, even though we've become apostate. Because he was sort of the prophet to the Israelites. So he says, don't be afraid, go send him. So the guy comes, he brings his whole retinue, his chariots, his horses, his armor bearers. He's got all his gold, all the silver, gold, changes of clothing. And he comes to Elisha's house, and, Elisha doesn't even get up and open the door. He's just sitting on the couch watching the Bears game. He doesn't even get up. And he just says, well, go tell my servant. He tells the servant, go tell him to go wash himself 7 times in the Jordan River, and he'll be healed. So Naaman, who is, again, he's this impressive, powerful, important guy, he's feeling pretty disrespected. He's like, the guy didn't even get up to answer the door, and he just sent me to go wash in the Jordan River. He says the rivers up in Damascus, up in Aram, are way more beautiful than the rivers here, than the Jordan. I'm not going to wash in the muddy old Jordan River. That would be, by the way, that'd be what Maria would do. Maria would say, you said, go wash in the Mississippi River. She goes, no, the rivers in Northern California are so much more beautiful, I'm just going to die with leprosy. I'm not getting into the Mississippi River. So he kind of does that, but mostly he feels like he's been insulted. So he leaves. He's mad. He says, well, who are these people? I'm not going to wash in this Jordan River. I'm going back up north. One of his servants comes to him in great humility and says, she says, Father, a term of endearment, of respect. He said, if the prophet had told you to do something great, you would have done it. This is so simple. Just go wash in the Jordan 7 times. Just please. So it kind of shows the humility of Naaman, and so he does. He goes, and he's completely healed of his leprosy. This really divine, powerful moment. So he goes back to Elisha, and he's just sort of overwhelmed with his healing, and he says, I want to give you all this stuff. And Elisha says, no, I don't need any of it. I don't want any of it. Basically, God can't be bought, and he didn't take it. So the guy says, so Naaman says, well, I want 2 things. First of all, I want to take as much soil as I can take, that 2 mules can take back to Damascus, back to Aram. Because when I offer sacrifices, I want to offer sacrifices only to the one true God. And at that point, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, at that point, the idea was that the ground was sacred and that gods were gods of regions. So there wasn't like one true God. Every region had a god. If you remember, David, even when he was fleeing from Saul, he couldn't worship when he was down. When he fled and he was in the land of the Philistines, he couldn't worship because he was on the wrong ground. So there's this big gap in Old Testament theology, thinking of God as a regional God and God as a God of soil. I think sometimes we make that same mistake too. Sometimes if we tend to think of God as gods of lands, but God is God of everything. God's not limited by a landmass. And in fact, we know that part of the whole, the whole eschatology of our faith is that Jesus is coming again, and he's the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. But there's this gap in Naaman's theology. So he wants to take some soil back to Damascus. And then the other thing that he wants to do, he says, then have God forgive me, because when my master goes to the temple to worship and he's leaning on my arm, because his master would be old and he's kind of helping him walk in, when we bow, he says, I'll bow with him, but, have God forgive me, because I'm just doing this to help my master. And Elisha goes, that's no big deal. Which is also an indication that sometimes we get way too hung up on things that are not really all that important. And Elisha was sort of like, that's not a big deal. You're just helping your master out. That's fine. So then he leaves. He takes the soil with him. And Gehazi, who is the servant of Elisha, he says, well, my master, I'm going to talk a little bit more about him later, but he says, my master let him off way too early, way too easy. He goes after him. And he wants to get a talent, a big chunk of that silver and a change of clothing. And Naaman says, sure, take as much as you want. Take whatever clothes you want. Takes him. He brings it back, hides it in his house. And then he goes to see Elisha. And Elisha says, well, what did you just go do? And he goes, nothing. And he says, Elisha says, you didn't think my spirit was with you when you went to go see Naaman? And he says, so I see everything that I know everything that you've done. And he says, you don't trade. We don't need anything. And he adds to it, we don't need orchards or land or servants or gold or silver, any of that. We don't need any of it, indicating that Elisha has already been offered the world by all of these kings that he's dealing with, and he's turned them all down. He says, we don't need that stuff. I don't need it, and neither do you. So he says, the leprosy of Naaman will now be yours for the rest of your life. So then his servant becomes leprous. There's a really cool story behind that, too, that I'm going to kind of talk about, I think, next week, about the forgiveness of God and the hope even in the midst of screw-ups. So when I look at this story, it's kind of one of those stories you tell kids. Because it's kind of got this, there's a lot of little interesting movements. Probably we've heard the story. If you've taught Sunday school, you've probably taught the story. And in many respects, it teaches us about the humility of Naaman. Naaman was this really humble guy. And it starts with the humility of him listening to an Israelite slave girl and kind of saying, well, yeah, I will humble myself and go see this servant, this prophet in Israel. So there's that part of it. But it also teaches us how quickly humility can go from us, right? Like this story has me written all over it. Like I try to think of myself as at least trying the best I can to be a humble guy. But then getting like super butthurt over something that was pretty simple, really. The guy didn't come up and he didn't open the door and he just left me standing there. And then, who's that guy thinking? Doesn't he know who I think I am? And da-da-da-da. And so he has all of this stuff, probably stuff that some of us are maybe a little bit more prone to than others. But still, humility is something we have to continue to always pursue. Because here's the thing about humility. The Bible says that God opposes the proud. There's like 3 places where it's repeated in the New Testament, and it's 2 places in the New Testament, and it comes from a proverb. So when God talks about him opposing something, and the idea is this, he's coming at you, he's blocking you, he's coming for you. it's probably something you should avoid. There's not very many places the Bible says that. And pride is one of them. God opposes the proud. So if God opposes pride, then we should do everything that we can to not have it. But our instinct is to have pride. And so if we have pride and God says, I oppose it, he's going to bring you down to a place where you don't have pride anymore. He's going to humble you, and that always sucks. Every time God has brought me to humility is a place that I have not enjoyed getting there. So I'd rather just operate out of a place of humility rather than God putting me in a place of humility. Does that make sense? Always better to avoid God coming at you and opposing you. So this is sort of the things that when I look at this story, it reminds me of the effort that we have to make to be people of humility. And note who it came from for Naaman. It came from a servant girl who served in his wife's retinue. And then it came from one of his servants after he's left. You know, sometimes the encouragement to be humble, the rebuke, if you're not being humble, comes from people who you probably don't want to hear it from. People that maybe you even perceive yourself as greater than. Some of the sharpest rebukes I've had were from people that it was hard for me to receive them from because I thought I was, better than them, smarter than them, more capable than them. And those rebukes very often are the ones you need to listen to. Because there are people that are saying truthful things to you, and sometimes it's hard for us to receive. So I think about that. I think about how Naaman received this in humility. And I wonder, when I look at this story, how many things in my life have I missed? Healing. The peace and the contentment of God, because I didn't listen in humility to somebody who was speaking to me, that God had put in my life, that person that was easy to overlook. The reason that Naaman was healed was not so much that he listened to Elisha, it was that he listened to a slave girl and he listened to his servant. And because of that, he found the healing of God. I think that's profound. I think that is a profound lesson for any of us who tend to lend ourselves, who tend to sort of be oriented around our own self-sufficiency, our own pride. That had a big impact on me as I'm reading through this story a lot. And I'm thinking to myself, God, I don't want to miss any of those voices. It's easy for us to listen to the big, powerful voices, but those small voices that are really the ones that often God uses to open our eyes and open our hearts. So there's one of the things that I take from the story. The other thing I think from the story is Elisha. Elisha figures prominently in this, obviously, but I love his response. One of the characteristics, which is when we look at the last story of Elisha's life, one of the characteristics of Elisha is his boldness. When the king is fearful, when the people are fearful, and Elisha knows, if you were here last Sunday, you know that after Ben-Hadad, Ben-Hadad's servant comes to Elisha and asks, is my king wants to know if I'm going to live. Ben-Hadad's getting older, and so he goes. Elisha goes up to Damascus, which is the capital of Syria, and he tells the servant, "Yes, your master's going to live." And then it says that he looks at him a long time until the servant Hazael gets nervous and kind of looks down and then he begins to weep. And he says, "Why are you weeping?" He says, "Your master's going to live, but you're going to kill your master. You're going to usurp his place as king, and then you are going to absolutely torment Israel. You're going to cut pregnant women open. You're going to dash the babies' heads open on rocks. You're going to kill the young men." So this is the guy he's dealing with. he knows the danger that's coming, the power of the Syrians, and yet he goes, bring it. It's going to be a great day. Man, I don't know if that resonates with anybody else, but that does with me. It is so easy to be discouraged. It is so easy to look around at all the stuff that's happening and just the state of our world and just the pain and the suffering that you see just everywhere you go, and just the chaos, and it can be so discouraging. And sometimes it can make you frustrated, and sometimes it can make you angry. But I love the boldness that he has. He says, let him come. There is still a God in Israel. And I'm reminded of that. I have to remind myself of that. Jesus hasn't fallen asleep at the switch. Jesus is still driving the train. Things are still in the order that God is anticipating. God's doing something. I don't know what it is, but he's still the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He's still in control of it. And it's a great day to say, no, things are going to be just fine. It's going to be just fine. Just this weekend, because as I'm kind of reading through this, it's going to be fine. We had an awesome time yesterday, men's breakfast. Super fun. Good times. Lots of good plans. It's going to be great. I had a great day just kind of watching football. Terrible day for San Francisco, but it was a great day in football. Some great football. Bears are going to kick butt today, and some of my friends will finally have smiles on their faces after decades of remorse. That's going to make me happy. I find no joy in your pain. It's going to be nice to see the Bears fans smiling again. It's going to be a great day. There's still a God in Bettendorf and in the Quad Cities. Things are going to be all right. And I just love, even though things sometimes look sort of bleak and discouraging, I just love the swagger, the hubris of Elisha in the name of God. The confidence, the boldness. It was one of the characteristics. And I like to remind myself of that. It's going to be fine. Things are going to be fine. But the thing that I think I kind of walked away from this story, all that stuff, it'll preach. There's more that we're going to kind of dig into a little bit about the forgiveness of God next week and the grace of God. But I really was struck by Naaman saying, I want to take the soil. I want to take the soil. Because when I sacrifice, I want to be sure that I'm sacrificing to the one true God, the God of Israel. And the only way you can sacrifice to Israel's God is if you sacrifice on Israel's soil. Is the only way. That's the way they saw it. That was sort of what ancient theology of gods were. So I want to take the soil. Now, obviously, there's this gap in his theology, right? But there's a big gap in New Testament theology. You know, the idea that there is something sacred about soil. Mankind was created out of it. There's only one person, which I also think is unique, that wasn't created out of soil. That wasn't created one person that was Adam, and then all the rest of humanity comes through this lineage of soil. You know, there's something sacred about the life-giving aspect of dirt, particularly here in Iowa. You ever thought about, obviously you all have, the corn in Iowa? You don't think about it unless you're from Iowa. If you're not from Iowa and you come into particularly like the region, this valley that we're in, you go, my God, that's some big corn. Never saw corn that big ever in my life. And it's the soil. There's just something unique, wonderful about our soil. It's also why it's hot and humid. But for Naaman, it was the soil. I had to have the soil in order to be in the presence of God. I had to have the dirt of the land of God. And I think this is a big part of why Jesus uses the land of soil, the imagery of soil for new life. You remember the story of Moses, and he's at the burning bush, and there's a voice that comes from the bush, and it says, take off your sandals, you're standing on holy ground. So the idea was wherever God was, that's where the the ground was holy. They couldn't go up to Mount Sinai because where God was given the 10 Commandments, because that land was holy, that mountain was holy, and if you went up there, you'd die. And so there's a lot of, he said this, a very similar thing to Joshua. So there's lots of these kind of ideas that God is in this place. The very idea of the temple was based on land, on soil. It had to be in a particular place, Mount Zion, and it had to be in God's presence. So it was most acutely felt and known when they went into the Holy of Holies in the temple. That's where the presence and the power of God was among his people. And in fact, it says when Jesus died and the temple veil was rent in two, we always look at that now as we all have access to the Holy of Holies, but I think it has just as equal amount to do to expose the hypocrisy and the emptiness of the faith, of the religion of Jesus' time. God hadn't been in that temple of temples, the Holy of Holies, for a long time. But the writer of Hebrews is very clear that now we, and Paul also saying that we become the temple of God. Jesus uses the land of soil. And if you remember, he talked about the parable of the sower, and he's throwing seeds, and there's good soil, and there's rocky soil, and there's soil that's on the road, and there's soil that has weeds, and then it's not good soil, and the gospel doesn't take root. But he says, but there's some good soil where when the gospel takes root, it begins to flourish. So for Jesus and for us, the theology of soil is more important, I think, than we recognize. Because the soil of the gospel is our heart and our position to receive or to reject it. And the Bible, the words of Jesus, is really clear in Matthew 13, that the good soil is the heart that receives the gospel and it flourishes. It doesn't get choked out like the weeds choking out the wealth, the worries and concerns of the world and wealth and all the things that keep us distracted from the gospel of Jesus. The hardness of our heart, the rocks that are there that let the roots just penetrate a certain amount. All the distractions in our life where Satan comes and picks the soil up off the seed up off the dirt. The sacred soil is the soil where the gospel penetrates my heart and the gospel flourishes. And I mean all of it. We receive the blessing of God. We receive the tasks assigned to us by God. We receive the gifts of God as he's given us to use them for the benefit of his kingdom. That's why they're given to us. And the gospel begins to flourish, and that's what I'm seeing kind of throughout our church is the gospel taking root in good soil and the gospel flourishing and people taking the words of Jesus seriously. And I love it. It's so encouraging to see. I see it in my own heart in a way that's new, that's been challenging. Some of the things about the soil is you can get rid of stuff. You can take some rocks out, and you can take some weeds out, and you can make the soil more open to receive the word of God. You can. I know. I've been doing it. I'm going to keep doing it. Because everywhere I go, I'm not going to find a place that God is. I'm going to say that again. I'm not going to a place where God is. I am where God is. And wherever I am, that's where God's presence is. If you have soil that is good soil, where the gospel of Jesus is flourishing, that's where God is. There is no holy place. You are God's holy place. I am God's holy place. And everywhere we go is sacred soil. Got it? I think we got it. Don't need to add to that. So we're going to sing songs about the holy place. And I know it's a strange, so y'all come up. Kind of a simple service today, doing it old school. If you've been around, these are some old songs we've been doing for a while. But when we begin to worship and we start singing about this holy place, Keep that in mind. We're not going to a place where God is. We are a place where God is. Every single one of us. And there's something unique when we come together in faith. All of this dirt coming together. This dirt with the divine life of Jesus.